More basketball history at Florida Atlantic, and I don't think any of us are surprised about who made the history. This is the Inside Florida Atlantic podcast, Florida Atlantic Voice, appropriately named that because, well, I'm the voice of FAU, Ken LaVicka. And hey, how about our presenting partner, Robes Law Group, personal injury lawyers, ROBES, robeslawgroup.com. That's Robes Law Group. Thank them for everything that they do for the podcast, that they do for me, and that they do for all of South Florida with your personal injury matters. We have an awful lot to tackle, an awful lot to cover here on this edition of the Florida Atlantic Voice. By the way, remember to subscribe to the Florida Atlantic Voice wherever you get your podcast. Doesn't have to be Spotify. Doesn't have to be Apple. It can be whatever black market foreign podcast provider you try and get your content from. It's there. It's going to be there. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to judge. Go ahead and just hit the subscribe button. That's all I ask. And please tell your friends. Please tell the FAU fans in your life. Please pass the word. And then we're going to be in great shape moving forward. It's a give and take here on the Florida Atlantic Voice, again, wherever you get your podcast. Congratulations, wholehearted, to Alijah Martin, the first ever Florida Atlantic degree-earning alum to be drafted into the NBA, 39th pick overall. He goes in the second round to the Toronto Raptors. It's really, really still, to me, tough to fully consume that Alijah, our Alijah, is a draft pick into the NBA. I feel like a proud dad. Man, it's just so good. And then Vlad Goldin, he signs immediately after the draft concludes a two-way contract with, yes, the Miami Heat. So what stories and what memories we have with Alijah and Vlad. And I first of all, with Alijah, that white suit he wore to the draft was, man, like Alijah can dress. He's got some fashion sense. And I knew that being around him as often as I was in Boca. That white suit, that's as good as it gets. Sometimes those white suits can just hit wrong. That thing was all class. Well done by Alijah Martin. It struck me watching Alijah get drafted as well, that he was getting drafted into the NBA in the same building that he concluded his FAU playing career, and that was Barclays Center in Brooklyn. I did think that there was some interesting full circle that came with that. And Alijah, his mom, his family, being able to be there and share that with him. And he's going to be able to prove himself to an organization and get a head start because he was a draft pick. They certainly love the player, but you've got to have some supreme character as well, especially in the second round of the NBA draft. And Alijah is absolutely full of that character. And I have to admit, felt a little bit emotional just with knowing the ups and the downs and the twists and the turns, the peaks and the valleys of Alijah Martin and his basketball life, for it to culminate in being drafted into the NBA, first Florida Atlantic alum to ever be drafted into the league. It almost had to be him. This is someone that's still, and I've said it on the podcast before, and a number of you who listen to the pod will even if you haven't heard it here, but have talked to me just in passing, in private moments, you'll recall me saying that there's still, in my nearly 20 years at Florida Atlantic, no single player that made a greater leap from his first year of college basketball to his second year of college basketball than Alijah Martin. Alijah came in as a freshman, a true freshman, after an illustrious high school career in Mississippi, was a high school football star as well. And honestly, anytime he took that floor in the first year for FAU, it was just him sort of showing off his athleticism, running baseline to baseline. There wasn't much refined about his game. It was very raw. It was very green. And him and Dusty didn't exactly see eye to eye during the course of that season, and had a fairly contentious postseason exit meeting. And Elijah could have transferred. He could have said, "I'm out of here." But his mom said, no, you're staying put in Boca. And Elijah decided, all right, let's get to work. And by the time Elijah showed up for camp, going into his sophomore year, completely different player, completely different mindset, and completely different game. He had put so much work into it and had been able to sand down the rough edges. All of a sudden, he was a rim attacking freak. He came into his own defensively and became one of the best on-ball defenders in FAU history. That second year, he was the leading scorer for Florida Atlantic after a first year where he was basically just sort of going out and getting some conditioning work in anytime he took the floor. I've never seen a player look so, I don't want to say out of his element, but so unrefined into the very next year, looking like he's played college basketball for 4 or 5 years, like Elijah, freshman year or sophomore year. And it was just steady improvement, steady maturity, consummate leader as he went on through his career. I firmly believe that FAU could have been Alijah Martin's team, but Elijah, being the consummate team player, allowed the rise of Nelly Davis to flourish, and instead of fighting it, said, I'm fine being a complimentary piece. If Nelly's going to be the one with the ball in his hands more often than not, I'm going to play my game. I'm going to go win championships, and we're going to be a formidable national championship contender. And it takes a big man, a mature man, a leader, an example to do something like that. There could have been a power struggle. Elijah saying, this is my team. Nelly saying, this is my team. But no, Nelly burst into that role late in the Final Four season and then into the year after, going into the American. And Elijah said, all right, I'm going to do my job to the best of my abilities. I'm going to leap out of the gym. I'm going to hit timely threes. I'm going to defend. I'm going to stay on the floor because I do all these things, even if the shot's not falling. And you know what? That sort of approach, I think him serving that role at FAU is what helped him absolutely thrive at Florida in the same exact role. He's such an easy teammate to work with. He does all the little things, all the small things. And I am so immensely proud to see him live a lifelong dream, but I'm still more proud of the fact that I saw him walk across that stage in Boca and earn a degree at Florida Atlantic. That's first and foremost. And now Elijah in the NBA, it's amazing. And one more Elijah thing as well. You remember after he tried to throw down that, I think out of relief, that windmill jam after Florida Atlantic won in the second round of the NCAA tournament 2023. Fairleigh Dickinson, who had given FAU a scare. Fairleigh Dickinson was up 8 in the final 8 minutes of the second half. Florida Atlantic came storming back, and it was just sort of letting the tension go. Him at the buzzer trying to throw down that tomahawk jam, or the windmill jam, and he was getting lambasted on social media. I mean, absolutely grilled and filleted. There were threats coming his way. It was such a vast overreaction. If this happened against any other team in the NCAA tournament, it would have been, oh, look at the athleticism jumping out of the gym. Now, he did clank it off the back rim, and it went about 57 feet into the air. But because the only other team in the NCAA tournament that could have been a bigger shocker, bigger Cinderella than FAU was Fairleigh Dickinson, the team FAU was playing that night. And because, coddling poor Fairleigh Dickinson, Alijah became a villain. And I remember going to the airport. We went from Columbus right to New York City because it didn't make financial sense for Florida Atlantic to fly all the way back to South Florida to Boca, and then fly the charter that the NCAA provided back to New York. Dusty and the coaching staff decided, you know what? This is going to be easier if we just take a commercial flight to New York and settle in Times Square. And it ended up working out great because all the other teams that were there in that regional, Tennessee, Michigan State, Kansas State, they all went back to their campuses after they won their second round game. And then they get to Times Square, they get to New York City, and there's the bright lights, and there's all the people, and there's all the attention. FAU had already been immersed into that 3 days prior, and were able to acclimate to all of it already. So by the time Michigan State and Kansas State and Tennessee are getting that thrown into their face for the very first time, FAU has already been living in New York City for 3 days. They've been to Madison Square Garden. They've practiced already. So it was a great decision. But to the point, on the plane to New York, it was nonstop from Columbus to LaGuardia. And Alijah was just sort of doing his own thing, had his headphones in. I kept just kind of looking back, trying to see if I could get a sense of where his head was at. Because I know he's on social media. I know he's read some of the stuff. And we land, and we taxi to the gate at LaGuardia, and we knew flying into LaGuardia the night after that team did what they did to get into the Sweet 16, an unlikely Sweet 16 berth in New York City especially. People were going to recognize the team. They were going to recognize the logo. They were going to recognize the faces. There were going to be people that were going to say things. They were going to ask for pictures. But when it comes to Alijah, there were going to be some people that potentially were going to say some unsavory things to him. And so as we were about to get up and exit the plane, I looked back to Alijah, finally was able to make some eye contact with him. Like, I didn't want to bother him, tap him, rub his shoulder, say, hey, you good? But finally able to get some eye contact with him. And I asked him, hey, man, you good? And he looked at me, he goes, Ken, I'm great. I'm absolutely great. Big smile, big Alijah Martin smile on his face. And that's when I knew this guy's unfazed. And he handled all the questions about the dunk, the attempted dunk, because that's all he was asked about the first day, the first round of media availability that FAU had there at Madison Square Garden. Tiny little visitors' locker room is where FAU was placed and wedged into during the two games that they played there at MSG. And that first day, all that the New York Daily News, the New York Post, the Associated Press, all that they wanted to ask Alijah about was not his stellar season, not his freakish athletic ability, but the dunk, the attempted dunk, the sportsmanship or lack thereof. And Alijah absolutely handled it like a pro, took responsibility, even though I didn't think he had to. He did it, came off as unbelievably mature, to a point where after that first day, none of the questions came up again because he handled everything so adult-like, so professionally. And all of that's going to serve him so well in what I think can be a very long and illustrious NBA career for Alijah Martin. Congratulations to Alijah Martin, first ever FAU alum to be drafted into the NBA. And then there's Vlad. And I think that there are several teams that made a gruesome mistake not actually pulling the trigger and drafting Vlad, who, by the way, also FAU degree, also now two-way contract, Miami Heat. A number of teams made a mistake, in my opinion, not drafting Vlad, but in my humble opinion, one of the smartest teams in the NBA with the best front offices in the NBA, Heat culture, the Miami Heat say, yeah, we like this traditional center in Vlad Goldin. And Vlad is truly one of the best human beings you're ever going to run into. A lot of you know that. You listen to this, but you've met Vlad. Vlad's always made himself available. And so you know that Vlad is an exemplary organism, okay? I think that for Vlad, it was such a circuitous route to this place for him. Came from Russia, not knowing really any English, went to Texas Tech. I can't imagine what Lubbock, freaking Texas is like after coming from Russia. Doesn't work out after a year. He's looking for a new location. Dusty May says, come on, big man. Come on. Let's see if we can develop you. And boy, did FAU develop him. And Vlad's game went from what you typically see from a college big man, a little bit tentative, sometimes a little bit soft despite the size, a little bit unsure, to then a dominant force that could not be stopped, could not be guarded, could not be game planned for, like Vlad was in the final 6 weeks of his FAU career and then his one season at Michigan. And it's tough in basketball these days. Not just college, but in the NBA. But it's tough to be a traditional center in the year of our Lord 2025 because everybody is a stretch 4. Everybody is a stretch 5. Everybody is like 6'9", 6'10", positionless. Vlad's 7'1". Vlad's a back-to-the-basket center. And because he's so smooth and so good and so skilled and so strong and so dominant, so powerful, made of iron, he can still, as a traditional center, translate to this modern day approach to basketball, which is why I think that he's going to see some significant NBA team time, not just G League time, on that two-way contract with the Heat. You're going to see him at Kaseya Center. You're going to see him play for Eric Spoelstra. Because while he's a traditional center, quote unquote, he can pass out of double teams. He's got remarkable court vision. He does have a stroke. He can hit outside of 15 feet. And the dude's just a flat-out worker. And he's built like a bull. I mean, he's Russian Steven Adams with, well, not the flowing locks. And he's got a better touch at the rim than Steven Adams. So I feel so good for Vlad and for his fiance and for his family and just for him. I mean, I don't know. I remember during travel, our extensive travel, I mean, this is every season, but especially during that Final Four year, when all of these guys, because of the media attention they were getting in the rankings and the success that they were having, I think a lot of them, most of them, at least like the core guys, your Vlads, your Elijahs, your Knicks, your Nellies, your Spoons, BJ, Gaff, all of these guys started to become a little bit introspective about what they are, who they are, because now you're in the spotlight. Now you have eyeballs on you. You need to represent a certain way. You need to kind of find yourself not only on, but also off the floor. And Vlad was someone that a little bit behind the 8 ball there, simply because there was still a tad of a language barrier. Though his English, it was okay at that point. But let's not forget, too, he comes from a country that had been universally criticized for the invasion of Ukraine. And Vlad had sporadically been posed questions about that. And there were larger storylines with Vlad than just basketball. And so he had to kind of figure things out personally really quick. And I remember him and I just sitting down at I believe it was in Atlanta, might have been Atlanta or Charlotte, at the airport at a Starbucks. He loved tea. He doesn't really drink coffee, but man, that dude, he's filled with 7 feet of tea at almost all times. And I asked him, like, what's next after this? We didn't, I mean, nobody really had NBA marked off the Vlad Goldin bingo card at that point, and he said, I play professionally. Just I can't go back to my home country, or else there's a good chance I'll never be able to leave again. So I have to figure out what the path is, and what countries are safe for me, and where I can continue to move freely. I can't really leave the States right now on the student visa that I'm on. I want to become a citizen. He did mention wanting to become a citizen. And there was a lot of uncertainty. He hadn't seen his parents in forever. There were some family issues that he was having, that he was fighting through during the course of that year, including a moment at an airport where he broke down crying, and his teammates were there for him. But things weren't easy for Vlad, and now he has a chance to live comfortably and maybe make generational wealth. And he's truly an American success story. And I just know, my girls, Addie and Leah, they adore him because he made the time for them. All the guys did. Elijah and Nick and Giancarlo, and BJ and Gaff and Nelly, especially. I mean, all I'm saying is that Vlad, they loved him almost an uncomfortable amount. They'd always yell, "The Giant, the Giant, the Giant." And I always tried to tell them, please don't call him the Giant. He walks through every airport in the southeastern part of America, and he's got random people, probably 5, 6, 7, 8 per every time he gets into a line to board an aircraft, with a middle-aged vacationing woman asking, "How tall are you? Oh man, your legs are going to be so cramped." And he always handled it with humility. 7 foot, 7 foot. But man, what an annoying question. You ask him that question as if nobody's ever asked him that before. So I tried to tell the girls, like, hey, and Vlad would be like, no, it's good. They called him the Giant. They took pictures with him all the time. I don't know. I'm just so happy for both those guys to be able to realize NBA dreams. I don't want to pour cold water on this. It does, though. There's about 30% of me. I got to be honest. There's about 30% of me, though, that drives me crazy that anytime they're introduced in the starting lineups for the Raptors or the Heat, it's going to say, and at guard from Florida, Alijah Martin, and not Florida Atlantic. The graphic will say Florida. At center, out of Michigan, Vlad Goldin. That's going to drive me crazy. Not Florida Atlantic. That's the next step now for this program. That's the next step for this program, is need to get someone in there that heads to the league right out of FAU. All of the pride that we got with Alfred Morris, all the pride we get when Trey Hendrickson says FAU. That's what we need now from a basketball standpoint. I know John Jacobs thought that could be Baba Miller. Baba decided to go to Cincinnati to close out his collegiate career. But the way that John Jacobs recruits, grabs out of the portal, develops, I still think he's the coach that's going to be able to do it. It was just, unlikely planet aligning circumstances that had FAU fall short of being able to realize that dream this time around. But 2 players, both bachelor's degrees from FAU, and both now in the NBA. One drafted in Alijah Martin, one signed in Vlad Goldin by the hometown team, the Heat. It is truly historic and something to be immensely proud of at FAU. And if you're a Florida Atlantic fan, and I know there's a lot of discourse these days about, should we really be celebrating on official accounts or even prominent fan accounts players who transfer out of Florida Atlantic? And I completely understand the conversation. Like, I get it. You can wish these student athletes well without giving them a confetti-filled send-off. Some deserve it more than others. But in this situation, I want to be abundantly clear about something. Alijah Martin was raised by FAU and realized a personal goal at Florida, but he was raised by FAU. Vlad Goldin, raised by FAU. There is more FAU DNA in Alijah Martin and Vlad Goldin, significantly more than there is Florida and Michigan in these two players, respectively. So FAU fans should absolutely celebrate them. Florida Atlantic should absolutely celebrate them. I thought that what FAU Basketball did with the graphic and with the story to document Alijah being drafted and Vlad being signed was wholly appropriate and rightful. So congratulations to both of them. Love both of you dearly, and I am so epically, amazingly proud. Also came out this week that Florida Atlantic has scheduled a really, really strong non-conference opponent, a mid-major opponent. It'll be November the 30th at the Ellie, Florida Atlantic and Adrian Wojnarowski's St. Bonaventure Bonnies coming in to Boca Raton. St. Bonnie's was actually in Boca several years ago. 2019, Florida Atlantic hosted through the Boca Resort a tournament, and St. Bonaventure was a part of it. FAU lost in a close game at the then Borough to St. Bonaventure. But then you may recall that Florida Atlantic played St. Bonnie's in Springfield, Mass. 2023, the Hall of Fame Classic, a 64-54 win. So Florida Atlantic and St. Bonaventure are going to play November 30th. And it is another in what's turning out to be a really strong mid-major non-conference slate for Florida Atlantic. FAU, by the way, going to go up to Olean, New York, and play St. Bonaventure next year. I'd be willing to bet that Adrian Wojnarowski, who's in charge of NIL now for St. Bonaventure basketball, after leaving as the GOAT insider, reporter, newsbreaker at ESPN. By the way, Adrian Wojnarowski was front seat, front row, right behind me for both the Tennessee and Kansas State games for Florida Atlantic in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight during FAU's Final Four run. Great guy. Closet FAU fan. I'm sure it's going to be judging by how he was reacting to FAU's success there at Madison Square Garden, perhaps he's going to be a bit conflicted when FAU and St. Bonaventure meet. But St. Bonnie's is paying his paycheck at this point, and he's a proud Bonnie as well. But he was also very close friends with Dusty May. But I'd be willing to bet Woj is going to be down at the Ellie for this one on November 30th. St. Bonaventure, this will be the final game of a Sunshine State Florida swing that they're playing. I believe they've got Miami and maybe Florida Gulf Coast in this as well, if I'm not mistaken. It did get me thinking, Florida Atlantic going up to middle of nowhere, Olean, New York next year to play St. Bonaventures. You probably want to make it part of a road trip, so you're not just one and done in it to middle of nowhere Olean. So maybe, just maybe, FAU can grab a money game with Syracuse or Pitt or Penn State while they're up there. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. I'm just spitballing here. Now to the non-conference schedule this season. So you add in St. Bonnie's, okay? You've got the third of the 4-game, 2 home, 2 away with Florida Gulf Coast, who was the 1 seed in the A-Sun tournament last year before falling short. So you go to Florida Gulf Coast, Naples. You have the final year of the Field of 68 tournament. So you're going to Liberty, the perennial favorite in Conference USA. So you go to Liberty, and then you also play College of Charleston and Coach Mack And that side, FAU going to be looking for revenge, but two teams that were winning teams last year and were competing for conference championships. Then you've got the Sunshine Slam in Daytona, where you have the possibility of playing teams like George Mason, who was exceptional last year, Loyola Marymount winning record, Jacksonville, who was extremely strong. FAU did beat up on it, the Ellie last year, but Jacksonville is a program on the rise because they're coached extremely well, and there's a lot of talent up there. So this is shaping up to be a phenomenal mid-major schedule for Florida Atlantic. When Tim Pernetti was, after Memphis was whining and complaining, was telling ADs and telling basketball programs in the American, you need to start scheduling better. This isn't good enough. We knew FAU wasn't who was being referenced because Florida Atlantic's non-conference was a bear last year. And FAU's non-conference is going to be extremely challenging and potentially very enriching again this year, and it's not even done yet. The schedule's not even completely compiled yet. So well done by the FAU staff. St. Bonaventure, Florida Gulf Coast, Liberty, College of Charleston, perhaps George Mason, perhaps Loyola Marymount, perhaps Jacksonville. Certainly going to be at least one of the three that FAU plays in there in Daytona, depending on how the brackets work out. This is strong. You remember the Final Four year? I vividly recall Dusty telling me, Ken, this schedule, I think this is the best non-conference schedule that we've ever put together. And let's keep in mind, Dusty May, in the early seasons of his tenure at FAU, Florida Atlantic's strength of schedule was really, really, really low. Really, really, really low, because he's trying to build a program basically from scratch with what he was left. And so compiling some wins, learning how to win, that was a little bit more important. But then by the time 2020, 2021, especially 2021, 2022 came around, and he felt a lot more comfortable with his system and who was in it, Dusty really took a step up, and Kyle Church was the one who really headed up the scheduling for that staff. It got exponentially more difficult. And then that Final Four year for Florida Atlantic, FAU got ambitious. Now, it didn't necessarily show up as much as I think Dusty thought it was going to in the net rankings, but nobody was really worried about the net going into that season because nobody could foresee what was about to happen, or very few could foresee what was about to happen. But Florida Atlantic's non-conference in the Final Four year was at Ole Miss, at Florida, home against Bryant, who had gone to the NCAA tournament the year before, Detroit, who had the leading scorer in the nation on their team at that point, at Albany, difficult mid-major, against South Alabama, who had won 20 games the year before, at Eastern Michigan, who had, at that point, maybe the most sure thing mid-major NBA prospect in all of college basketball, against Florida Gulf Coast, a very good A-Sun team. And then Northern Kentucky, who had gone to the NCAA tournament the previous season. So that was, at the time, a really challenging mid-major schedule. FAU was going to find out what it was through that schedule. Now, I don't think anyone foresaw that Florida Atlantic, other than the Ole Miss game, would completely wipe the floor with all of those teams. But it was the degree of difficulty being ramped up that season. And I know looking back now, based on the profile of Florida Atlantic, you say to yourself, oh, Ken, that wasn't a different. No, it was one of the toughest mid-major centric non-conferences of any mid-major team in college basketball. Dusty was taking some risks there, but Florida Atlantic had clearly elevated to another level during that offseason, and FAU ended up making quick work of that entire slate. But this reminds me of that. What John Jacobs is doing here reminds me of that. St. Bonnie's, Florida Gulf Coast, Liberty, College of Charleston. So those four teams in and of itself already make it more challenging than the good mid-major centric non-conference from the Final Four year. And then George Mason, Loyola Marymount, Jacksonville. That's good stuff. That's really, really, really good stuff. Hey, I wanted to, this is kind of funny. I wanted to just quickly shed some light on good friend of mine, Pablo Paez, proud FAU alum, does a lot for Florida Atlantic. FAU super fan. His wife Veronica, they and his two kids. By the way, I saw Pablo and his kids at the Inter Miami match against Columbus. Right before Inter Miami's historic run in the FIFA Club World Cup. I'm the radio play-by-play voice of Inter Miami. But Pablo, his wife, and their two kids went to the Panthers championship parade and made a crown with a rat on top of it, a Rat King crown. And it's I suppose it's a red sort of fabric crown. It's got the gold sort of structure to it on the outside to form it, and they glued, I believe, just a rubber rat on top of it. And Brad Marchand of all Panthers, the rat himself, noticed it from the double-decker bus that he was on through the parade there on A1A, Fort Lauderdale Beach, and had Pablo throw him the crown, and he wore it the entire rest of the parade and into the rally on the beach. So if you see photos of Brad Marchand from the Panthers parade, and all you have to do is Google Brad Marchand Panthers parade, you'll see the crown that I'm talking about. That's proud FAU alums, Pablo and Veronica, and their kids. They made that and threw it to him on the bus, and he wore it the entire time. So that is that. Yeah, that's hilarious. That is really, really, really fun. And FAU's on. We're everywhere, right? We're everywhere. There's nowhere that FAU doesn't have an influence now. Hasn't altered in some way, shape, or form. Want to end this edition of the Florida Atlantic Voice with this. Was very saddened to hear of the passing of the legendary Dave Nitz, who spent 50 years as Louisiana Tech's broadcaster, 49 as the football and basketball voice of Louisiana Tech, and 50 as the voice of Bulldogs baseball. He passed away this past week at the age of 82. But Dave is a college sports broadcasting legend in every sense of the word, an icon, someone whose contributions and accomplishments could never properly be put into respectful enough context because of just how influential he was in the industry as a whole. Me, in college, trying to be an aspiring broadcaster, knew of the greatness of Dave Nitz. And because my life is weird and my career has led me to some unexpected places, ended up being a cohort of Dave Nitz. Ended up having the opportunity to work alongside Dave Nitz for several years of my broadcasting career. Who knew, right? But Dave called baseball in the Orioles minor league system all the way back in the 60s, all the way back in the 1960s. He spent 1967 at Georgia Southern. From 70 to 73 was the voice of William and Mary, who was the head football coach at that time, Lou Holtz. Worked with a young Lou Holtz, did Dave Nitz, was his play-by-play voice. And then in 1974, Dave went to Louisiana Tech and called so many massive moments. Basketball triumphs, Karl Malone, Teresa Witherspoon, Kim Mulkey. And then from a football standpoint, he was too many to count. He was close with Terry Bradshaw, a proud Louisiana Tech alum. Also, full circle. Remember, I told you Lou Holtz head coach William and Mary when he was the play-by-play voice. Dave was then the play-by-play voice of Louisiana Tech when Skip Holtz, Lou's son, took over the program. But Dave, he was, and probably will be forever, the longest tenured college play-by-play voice in the history of Louisiana sports. He stepped away from his full-time duties as the third longest active play-by-play announcer back in 2023. And I look back at some of the conversations I had with him. He called me the kid because I was far and away the youngest play-by-play voice in Conference USA when we were in the league, pretty much for our entire time that Florida Atlantic was in the league. And I was approaching 40 during that time. I was in my 30s the entire time. Just kind of shows you the age of the roster there amongst play-by-play voices in Conference USA. But Dave, he was the wise sage. He was the seasoned vet. He had seen it all, done it all, called me the kid, and told me so many great stories and was such an influence. And it's a profound loss for not only the broadcasting profession, not only for the state of Louisiana, not only for Louisiana Tech, but college sports coast to coast, the entire landscape with the passing of Dave Nitz. And we will absolutely miss Dave, who was one of a kind, truly one of a kind. His catchphrase, you got to love it. That needs to be etched somewhere on that campus for all time. The football press box is named after him as well, rightfully so. He was alive to be able to take in that honor, and I'm glad for it. That'll do it for this edition of the Florida Atlantic Voice. Reminder, presenting partner, Robes Law Group, ROBES, robeslawgroup.com. Robes Law Group, personal injury lawyers in the community for you. Offices Delray Beach. Thank you to everybody at Robes Law Group. Listen and subscribe and tell your friends. Go word of mouth or send them a text or send them a Facebook message or a direct message. Say, hey, the Florida Atlantic Voice, if you like FAU, you're going to love this Ken LaVicka guy. You're going to love this podcast. Subscribe to it wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time. This has been the Florida Atlantic Voice. Bye-bye.